In this video, I'll give you 5 reasons why setting your emergency fund should be a top priority and why you should start building your emergency fund today. Look at this life vest. It's not just super fashionable, it's also super duper practical, and dare I say, mandatory for anyone who enjoys water sports. Just like your emergency funds, it's mandatory for anybody that's building wealth. Let's look at who really needs an emergency fund. If you have a home, you need it. If you're renting, you need an emergency fund. If you have kids, you definitely need an emergency fund. If you're single but have no one to rely on, you need an emergency fund. If you had debts, you need an emergency fund. If you like this video, you still need an emergency fund. But you get the point. An emergency fund is super crucial to your financial goals. It's just as important as liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting the bell while you're at it. See, I'm no Michael Phelps, but I'd make a pretty decent body double for him. And I'm also a decent swimmer. I was literally born on a boat. I learned how to swim by jumping off piers and seaside shacks. So your boy can hold his own in the water. So why do I wear a life preserver every time I go kayaking? See, it's the same reason why you should hopefully be wearing a seatbelt every time you're on the road. It's way better to have it and not need it than need it but not have it available to you. It might feel restrictive. It might feel like it actually slows me down, but regardless of how good you are at swimming, you can't do it while you're unconscious or you're incapacitated. This is not designed to help me to get to my destination faster. If my boat tips over, it's designed to keep me afloat long enough for rescuers to come and get me, or it will aid me as I swim to shore. See, when you're young and you're working towards a long-term investment goal, holding any amount of money in cash might feel like a waste of opportunity, a waste of returns. You could otherwise be earning money, right? Earning returns on that and compounding it if it wasn't sitting in cash. So that brings me to reason number 1. The first reason to have an emergency fund is it helps you get better returns. And I'm not just talking about theoretical returns, I'm talking about returns that the average investor actually gets. After all the emotional investment decisions, I'm talking about staying invested. An emergency fund helps you stay invested and actually benefit from the growth of your assets, the assets that you own. When I was doing research for this video, whenever I looked up emergency fund on YouTube, one of the first results, at least for me anyway, is Meet Kevin's. I don't even think I'm subscribed to him, but Kevin has a 20-minute justification as to why emergency reserves are crap.
It's always the same crap. It's always the same crap. It's always the same crap.
See, the main premise of this video is that he talks about opportunity cost. He says that every dollar he has is invested and is deployed in stocks and index funds.
In life, okay? Number 1 alternative is I put my money, every last dollar that I have, maybe with the exception of like $500 or $1,000 that I keep in a bank account, yes, but none of this 3 to 6 month crap. Every extra dollar that I have, I put into stocks and index funds.
After all, savings accounts would probably give you 1% right now if you're lucky. And the market has returned an average of 10% pre-tax and pre-fees long term. So you're losing on the spread. You're a loser. I'm paraphrasing here, but he called anyone that recommends emergency funding stupid. He called emergency funds crap.
It's always the same crap.
Actually, I think his thumbnail says emergency funds are stupid. Most will argue that holding 3 months in emergency savings puts too much cash drag on your overall portfolio. See, just like this vest, having it on will not make me row any faster. You know why? Because it's not designed to do that. It lets me enjoy my afternoon even if my boat tips over. I just get back up and stay on the lake. Your emergency reserves are aptly named. They are there for emergencies. I have to spell that out and I'll say it again. I'll even color it in crayon. Emergency funds are there for emergencies. They're not designed to get you returns. It's there for things that are beyond your control, like boilers failing, cars dying, or a sickness, or maybe a job loss, or I don't know, maybe getting locked down because of a pandemic. Your emergency reserve will buy you time. It'll keep you afloat long enough to make changes in your financial plan. It'll help you look for a new job. It'll give you time to downsize your home if you really needed to. Think of it as an insurance policy for your financial goals. Without an emergency fund, you would be forced to sell assets at a steep discount. See, since Kevin recommended that we put all our cash, our emergency funds, into index funds, let's look at VOO. By the way, I just want to say as a disclaimer, this is not a recommendation. This is not advice. It's simply an example for entertainment and information only. See, look at VOO. It's an ETF tracking the S&P 500. In February of 2020, it was trading at around $300. If you got laid off in March during the first lockdown, before any stimulus support was pumped out, you would need to sell your assets to pay for a month of living expenses, since you would have no cash reserves. That's what Kevin is recommending. If your house, for example, is worth $300,000 and I offered you $250,000 for it, would you take that deal? Absolutely not. You'd be insulted, right? Unless, of course, you really needed the cash. So let's go back to the VOO example. Let's say you need $5,000 for your living expenses for 1 month. VOO dropped all the way to $210 in March of 2020. So in order for you to get the $5,000, let's ignore taxes and let's ignore fees, you would have to sell 24 units of VOO. As of this recording, VOO is priced at $420. It's an all-time high. The 23 units you would have sold for $5,000 back in March of 2020 would be worth $9,983 today, nearly double. So even though it doesn't give you higher returns directly, it does prevent you from realizing or crystallizing your losses. This is why I disagree with Kevin on this. I think he really published that to be more of a thought-provoking piece. He also has other resources, other sources of income that would sustain him, unlike most people. So while it works for him, he's not forced to tap into any of his assets because he's probably making a few $100,000 a month on YouTube revenue. Most people are not in the same financial position, so you need that cash to protect your assets. Hey, before I continue to reason number 2, I just want to let you know, just like you, I'm still on this journey to building wealth and financial independence, right? But everything that's happened in the last year or so, it's really made me want to build up a bigger reserve. Call it my war chest. I think now, beyond the math, it's really gonna help me make clearer decisions. So give me your opinion. Do you think you should be building up more of a reserve now than you did before? Or do you think 3 months is enough? Perhaps 6 months or more is better? Let me know what you think in the comments. I'll tell you my opinion in the next video, and I may even feature your response. The second reason to have an emergency reserve is that it helps you pay your debts off faster. Okay, just like how the investments don't have better quarterly returns simply because you have cash, you can argue that by putting your emergency funds into your debt payments instead, you would probably pay off your debt sooner, right? And pay less interest. Mathematically, that's true. Pouring in every single free cash into the loans, credit cards, even mortgages could mean paying less interest and becoming debt-free faster. But what happens if you are in the process of aggressively paying off your debts and some unexpected event comes into play? An emergency comes, hits you right in the face. You'll end up doing a backslide and you'll end up putting new tires on a credit card, or maybe refinancing or selling your home to get access to cash if the emergency is severe enough. I talked about why accelerating your mortgage payment won't actually help you with your financial safety last week. Look at this video right there after this one. But if you're left without any easily accessible cash, you will end up actually going backwards and increasing your debt loads. Remember, 19.99% on zero debt is still $0. So any strategy that gets you to pay off your debt faster is worth considering. You may not want to wait until your emergency reserve is fully funded until you start paying off all your debts, but you should have at least a few $1,000s in easy to access cash while you're paying everything off, while you're going through that process, because you don't want to take 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So your emergency reserve will actually stop you from taking on more debt and thereby making you pay them off faster. The third reason to have an emergency fund is it means having more control of your taxes. So what does have to do with taxes. How does that work? Well, remember, in reason number 1, if you have an emergency fund, you're less likely to sell off your assets during unfortunate events. Well, there's another reason why you won't want to sell your investments even if you're winning. It's taxes. When you invest and you benefit from growth in asset values, you win. It doesn't matter if it's a non-registered brokerage account or registered accounts, whether that's an RRSP if you're in Canada or IRAs and 401ks in the States, the tax man is waiting for their share of your investment winnings. They can take up to 50% of your wins, maybe even more, depending on how your accounts are structured. So any amount that you withdraw could actually spike your tax rate. See, because most places have a marginal tax system, the higher your income is, the more drawings, the bigger your win, the bigger the tax. So the most tax advantageous way to get access to your capital is actually by spreading out your withdrawals over a number of years. But if you have an emergency like a severe illness or a prolonged job loss, you will have to pay taxes right when you need the cash, not based on your plan. It's much better for you to pay taxes based on what you're trying to do versus what you're forced to do. So consider that benefit of having an emergency fund. The fourth reason for having an emergency fund is it gives you more opportunities. I've actually heard other people talk about emergency reserves as their FU money. See, the idea behind it is if you're in a position where you need to make a move for your life, for your career, it's a lot easier for you to make that transition if you know you have a few months of spending available to you. Think about it. If you're upset of how your work is going, of how your boss is treating you, or how policies are changing in your workplace, and you know that you can do a better job starting your own business, or maybe switching to a different firm, it's a lot easier to make that transition when you know your bills are taken care of while you're making that switch, while you're making that change. So make sure that you take that into consideration when you see that cash that you're saving, and in next week's video, I'll show you how to actually accumulate that. When you see that cash that you're saving and it's just sitting there, think about what that's actually buying for you. It's buying flexibility, it's buying freedom, it's buying better decision making for you, thereby giving you more opportunities, not just in investments, but in your overall life choices. The fifth reason for having an emergency fund might not be something that you can relate to, but not every emergency is yours. It's a lot easier to give when you have extra cash. This is a bit of a sore spot because we had family that recently lost their home, their business, their belongings to a fire. And this might be difficult for you to understand if you're not in a culture where supporting family is the norm, right? Like if you're Filipino, you definitely understand this. You're from India or Pakistan or Jamaica, or wherever. It's a lot easier for you to understand that when there are things that go wrong back home, it's a lot easier for you to give and make those adjustments in your own life so that you can help out. See, it's not always gonna be your own emergency. That's the fifth reason for having and building an emergency fund starting today, is there is gonna be times in your life where you being ready allows you to extend that hand that other people might need from you. So I really had to separate out the reasons for building an emergency fund. I didn't think I would need a video like this, but when I was researching how to save an emergency fund, I felt like there were conflicting opinions as to whether you should even have cash or near liquid investments. And really, I needed to make sure that I talk about my own opinion when it comes to the reason behind it. But in next week's video, we're gonna be talking about how you're actually gonna start building this up to the point where you have a few months of buffer between you and financial catastrophe. I'll even create a download where you guys can actually walk through and take your steps based on your own situation. Until then, see you next week. Stay aware, take control. I love you all. Please do me a favor, hit that bell when you subscribe so that you get notified whenever we publish a new video. See you next week.